Welcome to Vulnerability, Introspection and Growth, the podcast where we explore the beautiful, messy and transformative magic that happens when we dare to go within. I'm your host, Robin Harris, and in each episode we'll dive into real, honest stories from people who've faced their fears, embraced their vulnerabilities and discovered unexpected growth in their personal lives, careers, or businesses. This is a space for deep listening, open hearts, and soul-nourishing conversations. Because when we meet ourselves in our rawest moments, that's often where our greatest wisdom starts. Let's begin. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Vulnerability, Introspection and Growth. And today I have an amazing guest for you, Ben Kench. And just as an introduction, a quick question. Have you ever wondered why your business feels stuck, even when you're doing everything you think you should be? Today's guest, Ben, brings a really refreshing perspective to that. He's recognised as the UK's #1 sales and business growth specialist and is the best-selling author of Selling for Dummies. But his journey hasn't just been about success. Through his own experiences of challenge and growth, Ben discovered a different way of approaching both life and business, one that starts from within. His From the Heart approach and his program Evolve focus on working with our feelings first, supporting the person so the business can truly thrive. So I'm sure if you followed my work for any length of time, you'll see why Ben and I have connected and why I'm absolutely delighted to have you here today with us, Ben. Welcome.
Robin, it really is. Honestly, it's such a, like you say, when we spoke before, it was just clearly we're aligned. So yeah, thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
I'm so looking forward to where our conversation is going to take us today. But just to start us off and help us to tune in, what would you say makes your story relatable for others?
Do you know, I'll just answer this by also sharing a story from when I used to be. I was on stages all over everywhere, and so I'd be regularly on stage. A few that spring to mind in Manchester, and just on the same morning on the same stage as Bob Geldof and the guy Innocent Drinks, I think his name was James. But the truth is, I was on this stage with, throughout the day, big names, and a lot of people were like coming to me afterwards, and the thing that they said to me was, you're relatable because you're saying, I know that you're the same as me, like that massive star up there, Bob Geldof or whoever, that, you know, lots of good stuff in the story, but I don't feel connected to them. Whereas I'm one of them, I'm one of you, I'm a common man, and I don't have the airs and graces or the titles or the stuff. And so I guess that is probably a better answer, Robin. You and I are the same, and we live in this wonderful pool of loving people. So I hope there's always connection there. It'd be so sad if we lost that.
Absolutely. It's just that, well, you're a human being and we connect on that level. So fantastic. And who do you feel will gain the most from listening in?
You know, I don't really know. None of us know who's listening and where it is in their journey or that stage of their life. But I know that I'd like to share my pains and my learnings from those pains so that anybody who's in that moment of pain, there could be male or female, young or old, rich or poor, it doesn't matter. But we've shared the experience of the struggle, and therefore the learning from the struggle is relevant to all.
Fantastic. And that's basically why I've set up this podcast and why I'm inviting people on to share their stories, because I strongly believe that it's in that vulnerability and that going through that emotion that is what we share. That is our common, or the thing that levels us all, really, isn't it? That we all experience emotions. We might have nuanced ways of experiencing those, and obviously we experience them for different reasons, but we can each identify with those emotions and know what it's like, how challenging it can be, how raw they can be. So fantastic. Thank you for sharing
And
that.
the truth is, Robin, when you, I, all of us are in those moments, we do feel isolated. We do feel no one else is bothered. We do feel it's different for me. And to know that others, A, are interested and B, understand is really needed.
Completely. And that isolation is a huge part of trauma, that we feel we can't talk about things. We feel our vulnerability makes us weak, and that we often feel shame around it as well, which is why another reason I wanted to bring this podcast for people to see from those who have been through and embraced and experienced growth and amazing gifts from embracing their trauma and being able then to share their stories, that it's not something to feel ashamed about. It's not something that makes you weak. Actually, it's the thing that connects us and it's the thing that gives us strength.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think all of us in that journey, the word trauma, for many, what you don't know what you don't know. And so we only know what we've got. And so sometimes, certainly in children and certainly in those early, possibly traumatic childhoods, those children don't know any different. So they think it's normal. So, of course, you don't grow up thinking you've had trauma until a later stage of life hopefully gets you to reflect back, and then you can unravel it and deal with it. But you don't go around saying, I'm in trauma. You just don't.
Like you say, it is your norm. And I have followed Brene Brown for years, and I love what she says, that it's when we don't talk about these things that they become such a burden and really hold us back,
Yeah.
versus being able to share our stories and somebody else saying, oh, yeah, me too.
Yes.
And we suddenly get that connection, and the shame then disappears because I'm not on my own. I'm not the only one who feels this way. I'm not weak because I feel this way, which is what I'm hoping to achieve through this podcast. So, lastly, on the quick fire 3 questions, what do you hope people will take away? And I'm sure that's already kind of coming out from what you shared already, but what do you hope people will take away from listening to this conversation?
Well, I think number one, I love you. And that's a message to you, the listener, right now, because you are loved. And I hope that if nothing else, knowing that you're loved can give you some strength. But I also hope that whether it's now or at some later stage, something that can stick and plant a seed, and that seed can grow into a renewed confidence. I hope that there's a love that sits after this that says you can and you are, so let's grow together.
That is the perfect antidote to that sense of isolation and aloneness that so many of us have carried. And that when we feel that, oh, no, I am loved, I can connect, people want to connect with me, I have value, that people would choose to connect with me and that there is love there for me, it's so healing.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah.
And you have spoken about the huge contrast between that outward success and inner turmoil through your work. Looking back, how much of your drive in business do you think was fueled by your own unresolved trauma, adverse childhood experiences, or whatever you might see those as, and that need then to prove your worth?
Yeah, I actually think no now, because I've grown up and grown through, the proverbial chip on the shoulder, that proverbial, you know, fight that's instilled, fight to be recognised. I've seen, you know, the youngest sibling of a large family, for example, the fight to be heard. You know, we've all got these situations. For me, it was many things I've learned, but it was that, you know, possibly the inner anger, which again I didn't know, but I had to channel, and I didn't know how because I was too young. It was possibly the stigma because we were poor, and you know, I now can see that all of me was learning to fight to get some sort of position, be accepted as a child at school without the right uniform, fancy clothes, but okay because I was okay at football, you know. And so you develop strategies unconsciously, but for me, it was that chip on the shoulder that said you're not good enough, that drove me, unconsciously drove me, because I got good. I was good at football, and I was good at girls, and I was good at sales, and I never consciously thought I'm not good enough, because I'd learned a coping strategy, and now aware that what was driving me was that inner gap. But yeah, definitely, and I think it is a common thread amongst entrepreneurs. I think that early, I mean, maybe not this latest generation where possibly we've cushioned them a bit too much, but you know, certainly go back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The entrepreneur came out of a need or an anger at not having, and was driven to have. Whether that having was money or recognition, different people, different strokes, but
Absolutely. And I think it's an interesting one when you talk about the current generation and being too cosseted and too, you know, where we give out prizes to everybody and that sort of thing. But I think that causes its own challenges and that sense of unworthiness in its own way. But does it lead young people? I know certainly people of my stepson's age, so he's in his mid-30s now, but that generation were feeling very disenfranchised and there's just no point. There's no
I,
future to look forward to. The
well,
planet's in destruction, and there was a lot of that kind of depressed way of looking at the world rather than the fired up way of looking at the
well,
world.
one might argue, Robin, 'twas ever thus. You know, I certainly, you know, I grew up, and we could have said, well, there's the Cold War, there's going to be an invasion, there's going to be a nuclear war, we could just give up. You know, arguably in every generation there's a potential for just giving up because there's enough doom and gloom on the news, and then there's some that say, no way. Firstly, I don't give a stuff about the news, and secondly, I'm not giving up.
Absolutely, and I was definitely, I carried something of the I'm not giving up within me, though I wouldn't have been able to articulate it necessarily or see why. I had that. No, I'm just going to keep going, keep going, keep going. Don't
Yeah,
give up. There was something I'd inherited there, but
yeah,
without maybe the I'm going to stand up and be very visible in that. It was just more underground. Just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. So yeah,
I think
absolutely.
a
Different people, different responses.
yeah, you know, that steely resolve,
Mm.
which pushes ahead, doesn't necessarily have to be goal driven. It is just I'm not giving up. Whereas, you know, some of us, it was all about pushing ahead because it was goal driven.
Or different kinds of goals, different ways
Yeah,
of
yeah,
working towards them, and maybe not being able to articulate them. Whereas sales goal is kind of easier in the sense of that's a target I have to hit.
yes, yeah.
Yeah,
Target.
versus just I'm going to get through another day.
Yeah, you know, and I guess, you know, certainly I developed that mindset of the next goal, the next target, the next number, and but then that feeds this absolute constant state of not enjoying now because it's only that number that matters. So in one breath, you hit a number and it's like, yes, I'm the king of the pile. But that literally, and this is one of the early learnings in sales, you're only ever as good as this week and tomorrow's. You could have been the star last month or last quarter, but it's past.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah,
And it
good
just
learning. No,
it's a paradox, isn't it? It feeds that yes, but it also feeds the yeah, but I have to keep going because I'm not worth anything more than that last sale. And somebody else could easily make the next one, not me.
yeah, but and it also, the thing is, in that energy, I found at least, it was only in that moment of recognition that I got some self-worth. The minute you don't get that moment of recognition, you've got no self-worth. Then you're back down to that inner turmoil. Who are you? You don't exist. You're not worthy of being remembered. You're not even remembered. You're like yesterday's news. So, scary.
It keeps you in survival mode, doesn't it? But I guess there's a kind of a cyclical thing there. It pushes you back down to the point where, no, I have to prove
Yeah.
that I am worth something. I do have value. But yes, constantly in that survival mode. And what's that doing from my perspective and my interest? What's that doing to your body and to your well-being?
Man, I'm only 30. Look.
And so many people separate their business problems from their emotional or their personal struggles, kind of what we're talking about here. What have you discovered about the connection between that sense of self worth and those deep inner unhealed wounds and the ability to create a thriving, not just a surviving, but a thriving business and life?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, and I think, like the nature or nurture type question, there's always going to be another way of looking at it. We've been trained by this system we've been raised in, and the system has raised us, firstly, mostly to shut up and do as you're told. Secondly, it's raised us that we are the minions, the working class, the paupers. They are above us, and so by design, everything around us has created this compounding of lack of worth. And amongst those lies, it's also said, yes, but that's work and this is personal. And so we, again, have been led down this path to excuse all the malpractice, that's business and it's separated. But the demographic of life and work has changed so much that now we're in this situation where 60, 70, 80% of the UK is working in small businesses. And you haven't therefore got the separation because business is life. And we're still to get used to that. But I'm going to stand up and say loudly and proudly that the two not only are inseparable, but we've got to reverse it now. And we've got to put self-love and human first, because the old way served the masters. It didn't serve the players. And now we've got to stand up and serve ourselves. And that is fundamental. If you're not happy, your work will suffer. So it isn't about just building work. It's more about building self and letting your energy build work.
I love that. I love turning that around because with all that's changing in the world and AI and everything, and people want authenticity, they want to be able to connect to a human and to feel that humanity. Because since COVID, when everything has gone so much online, I think we're missing that person to person, individual to individual sense of connection, and also that sense of being able just to pause and take a breath rather than just being constantly running around in that hamster wheel. And I think putting ourselves first, putting our self-care and our needs and loving ourselves first, and therefore giving permission to everybody else to do the same, has such potential for a better future going forward. And to do that for our children as well, to role model it for our children, to bring it into our education systems and all of the systems that we
It's,
have.
so as you know, I've always been what might be called an alpha male, and I've always been in the sales, which is a pretty alpha sort of fighting environment, and it's almost absolutely unheard of that you put those two together with the be loving, be gentle, be vulnerable. It's like, really? I was the one that was stood up there 30 years saying, don't be a wuss, man up. But you grow and you change, and hopefully I can stay within that environment and change the environment from within. But there's no doubt about it. I, and culturally we, used to belittle anything that wasn't strong and hard and dominant and emotional, because emotions were seen as a weakness. And I'm going to be really honest and be, well, I remember 30 years ago, with an element of shame, I might add, but I remember 30 years ago, my sister came to stay with me when I was running operations in Spain. And she came out to stay with me because of a divorce that was breaking. And I remember bringing her in to work with me because she was good at sales, but at the same time berating her and saying, get over it, stop being emotional. Emotionals are a weakness. And I actually said that to her. And I've never forgotten it, because, like, I don't subscribe to that at all now. Emotion and emotional intelligence is a massive strength. But that was the world that we were in. That was the world that I portrayed. It was emotions are weakness. Get on with it. Hopefully we can grow that now.
We do the best that we can do until we know differently.
Yes.
What would have been more of a challenge would be if you had have been there, learnt what you've learnt and carried on where you were, versus learnt what you've learnt and, oh, okay, I'm going to shift, I'm going to change, I'm going to bring those two together and adapt them in the way that feels appropriate to me. So, yeah, still have the strengths that you have, but maybe soften that with a little bit more of the emotion. And I think we've done such a disservice to the archetype of the alpha male by saying, well, you can't be emotional then. And the whole big boys don't cry. And I remember things being said to my brother when my dad left, the man of the house now.
Yes.
He was 10.
Yes.
And I can see where he was quite a kind of a loving, caring, demonstrative little boy, and he changed. And I look back on that with regret. Obviously, I wasn't saying that to him, I was only 13. But I think that we as a society often do a disservice in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think as a society, there's always going to be pockets that won't move, people that won't grow. But I like to think that as a society, the majority are now growing without it being the pendulum swing of, oh, woe is me, and everything's wrong, and just give me love and support, because equally we don't want to feed and nurture victimhood. But yeah, my mum and dad split up just before my 10th birthday, and I can consciously remember feeling like I was the man of the house. I was the oldest boy, so of course I'd take some things on. It was never spoken, but it was definitely an awareness I had even then as a young boy.
It doesn't need to be spoken, does it?
No.
It can be subtext that that's expected of you, and expectations are huge.
Oh, they are. Yes, definitely.
So you have experienced some incredibly intense challenges in your life. You've had an abusive upbringing, you've had threats, you've had loss, you've had businesses collapse. Was there a moment where vulnerability stopped feeling like weakness and started becoming the doorway to rebuilding yourself as you are now?
I Well, I would, yes, but no, because, and I'll explain that. Um, even, thank you, because I know you just relay little bits back that I've put in my story. And I still get emotional, almost crying when you point my brain back to remembering those times. And I'm not here to cry today, but the rawness is still very. It doesn't heal. We learn to live with it. It doesn't heal, I would say. So then when it comes to vulnerability, it's almost always just under the surface. No matter how I know I've grown, how I know I'm better for it, but because it's raw, the mention of all the stuff, it comes out and it exposes all over again, and it's another moment where maybe I'm going to cry in public. And so you know what, Robin, I can say now, do you know what? Yeah, I'm man enough. If it hurts, I'll cry. I'm not, I don't want to, but I'm not going to suppress it in some bravado or ego. I'm very vulnerable because I've learned to be loving in the fullest, truest, most powerful sense. And I, like you, with Brene Brown and all the learning in the last few years, vulnerability has been painted as a negative. And I definitely now see it as a strength. It is to be managed. It can still hurt, but it isn't to be avoided.
Co-host a bereavement drop-in once a month with a fantastic colleague of mine, Jane Greer, and she talks about that pain of loss, about how it doesn't go away. Loss and bereavement and loss that can come in so many different shapes and forms. Whatever form it takes, that loss changes us. And it's not that it goes away, it's that our life grows around it. So, like if you think of a jar and the loss initially in the jar is banging up against the sides, so we feel it regularly, daily. But then as life grows around it, the jar expands. Not that the loss itself doesn't change, but the jar expands. So the loss no longer bangs up against the sides all of the time. But something will happen that brings it to the surface. And she talks about her love for her father and when he died, the grief and the bereavement that she went through. And then time went on and life grew around that loss. But some things, would just happen from time to time. She would hear a voice that would remind her, or she found a letter once with his handwriting. And she was right back there. Could have been the day that he died. It was that intense. But for her, from that new standpoint, it was, this is how much I loved him, still love him. This is how we are still connected through that love. So although it's bittersweet and it does hurt, it's also a measure of the love that we feel.
Yes. Yeah.
And although loss is a gift we would never ask for,
yes.
When we can have that bit of change of perspective, shift of perspective because of time, and the life has grown around that loss, if we can come to the point where we can see it as, gosh, yes, that still hurts, but I know now that it's love. So I'm okay with that hurt. I can let it hurt. I just need a moment. I'm just going to take a breath. My eyes might well up. I might get a bit choked, but it's okay. I don't mind if people see that because me allowing myself to do that gives them permission. It's okay. It's not weakness. I'm not doing this and feeling ashamed. I'm not trying to hide it. I'm not doing, like you said, the bravado. I'm not going to cry. I'm going to keep my jaw firmly clenched. But if I'm okay with it, then it gives you permission to be okay with it. And I think we can soften in that way so that we don't all have to be walking around with these big shells that are very brittle then, and they can crack. Versus actually, I'm much more pliable now. I'm more flexible. I can allow my feelings to show, and then I can move on because I know that it's not a sign of weakness. It's not a. I'm not vulnerable in that sense. I'm a feeling human being, and that's
Yeah,
okay.
it's always going to be very difficult to really define because we're all going to be very individuals. And you know, I have to. You talk about the word trauma. We've talked in other conversations about that legacy after an event or after a series of events, and it almost, you know, we live in a world of comparisons now. Oh well, you know, I'm a big Monty Python fan. I love the, you know, cardboard box. You got a whole cardboard box. But this comparison of how hard was your childhood or how big was your trauma, that didn't hurt. You should have seen what I had to go through. And so, yeah, look, you know, we have to have a bit of humor as well. But the level of trauma or the level of vulnerability, it isn't a measurement on a scale which is high or low. If you feel hurt, sometimes it's appropriate to just possibly manage that, but never to bottle it and never allow it out. And yeah, I know that there's times when it's good and there's times when it's possibly just better to hold back. So I think as leaders, it's difficult for us to prescribe a way to be vulnerable because individual lives and circumstances and people will probably counteract something we say. But as a general principle, yeah, we don't serve ourselves by holding it in. And as you rightly point out, Robin, by leading with an example, we give others permission, and that's hugely powerful. It's the domino effect.
Equally, as you say, we do not want to be curled up in a corner with a box of tissues in that victimhood. I've been there. It's not a pretty sight, and it doesn't serve anybody, least of all yourself. So it is finding that place of balancing, I often say, because it's not one and done. It's in each situation for each individual what feels appropriate right now and what can I manage right now. But after the fact, not beating myself up about it, just doing the best that I can in that moment, in honesty.
Yeah. I know that there'll be people watching and listening, and the temptation is to say, oh, I'm all right. And if there's one thing I want both, I know we both stand for it, but I want us to say that it's better to be expressive than closed. And sitting there saying, oh, I don't need to say anything. I'm not vulnerable. You know, I'm all right. I'm not hurt. Is worse than saying, I might get shot down for this. I might get ridiculed for this, but I'm laying myself open because it's better out than in.
For me, I've needed to find a way, navigate through to where I can say that without attachment. So I'm not saying it from a place of victimhood. Oh, I need sympathy and pity and help and somebody wave a magic wand and make it all better because I've been there. But just to be able, in appropriate ways, because again, there are times when it's right to say something and times when probably it is better not to say anything right now, not to hold it in, but not to say anything right now. So yeah, and it's a learning thing, and it changes and it shifts, and it's not something that we get right or we get wrong. So I think it's definitely one of those navigations.
It is, yeah. And you know, I know that you know this, and we and the listener is knowing of this, but you can be right and then strong and then up and down like a wave, and so it's never a given. You could be absolutely feeling great for months and then bang, out of the blue something's triggered. So yeah, we just got to be loving and supporting of each other.
Ourselves, absolutely. And your message is that of love, particularly that self-love, and that's the answer. That's where our healing lies. That's where that navigation becomes easier and business and life become easier. So, for somebody who's listening into this conversation and currently feeling rather disconnected from themselves, maybe stuck in fear or carrying old pain that they've been pushing down for years, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. Where do you believe is, where does the healing start? What is maybe a first step? Where do people start?
I sometimes would say that we have to break down to break through. And I know that's horrible, but the longer we resist and hold back the tide, firstly, the bigger the explosion when it comes out. And secondly, we've just lost all those years of we could find a new level of happiness. And I don't wish for anyone to have that breakdown, but because it's a route to healing, I do. But if you can find that path of healing and letting out what's hurting without it getting to a point of explosive breakdown, then that's magical. Because if you've been holding something in, if anyone watching has been holding something in and denying that conversation, don't be silly to themselves, that means nothing. Don't be that will build over time. So don't let it build over time would be my message, because it can be cathartic, but it's also destructive. So listen to that now. And whether it's leaking out into relationships or leaking out into business or leaking out into your health, it's going to be leaking out somewhere. And the world around us in those three important areas, relationship, health, and business, those three areas will be the betrayal of that inner. So better to get it out and deal with something that's not right but isn't broken than let it build and explode and destroy everything.
Absolutely. Like the pressure cooker, to let some of that pressure off from time to time. And yeah, it's that saying of you need to feel it in order to heal it.
Yes.
But again, if there is anybody listening who's been holding stuff in and maybe only now recently becoming aware that there's a hell of a lot in there and you're afraid to open that can of worms. And I know I've spoken to people and I felt myself that if I open it, there's going to be no end. It's a bottomless pit. It's never going to stop. And it's quite scary how intense that feels. It feels too big, too unmanageable. So you just keep that lid on, that Pandora's box. If there is anybody in that situation, I'd highly recommend just reaching out and asking for some support, because definitely I agree, Ben, that it's better to let things out, but in a manageable way. So if you're feeling you can't manage that alone, do reach out and ask for some help. There are lots of different options available depending on what you feel you need. So, Ben, we've come to the end of our time, but it's been a fantastic conversation, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners are going, I need to speak to Ben. I need to find out more about his work. Where can they find you?
Well, I think the first thing I'd like to do is encourage them, please, to go read my story, because this is my story. It's also the journey of life and of entrepreneurial life, particularly. But it's my story that is raw. That still makes me cry when I read some passages of it. But if you would like to know the man, then please read my story. And second thing to that, Robin, just quickly, is that in if you want to put a label, we all like labels in this world. What do you do then? Which box are you in? Ostensibly, I would be in the sales stroke business stroke coaching, because that's what I've done all my life. But I'm a man of love, and I see that small businesses are not thriving, and the owner is tempted to look outside at the marketing they're not doing, or the depression in the economy, or whatever it is. And I will tell you with massive love that when you change the energy of that person in a safe environment with a virtual hug, then that energy change will totally change the business fortunes. And that's really where I spend all my life. And so my program is called Evolve, and you can talk to me. I'll give you my email address, benk@uniquementoring.com, but that's a YOU, unique mentoring.com. And I know you'll be able to put it into the notes. But I'm also very transparent. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Facebook. And as far as I know, there's only one Ben Kench that says about the son of a preacher man on his blurb. So I'm very open. I'm very willing and loving. I don't sell every time I talk.
Fantastic. And yes, all of your details will be in the show notes below. So if you're watching and you want to connect with Ben, or you want to get a copy of his book, then just read the notes below this video. Ben, thank you so much. It's been an amazing conversation. I've loved having you on the show with us.
Thank you. Let's do it again. I love if we, every time we talk, if one other person gets over that swallow self-help ask, then we've done our job.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you. And if you've enjoyed this episode, do hit subscribe and come back and join us again next time. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Vulnerability, Introspection and Growth. I hope it's given you a moment to breathe, reflect, and perhaps even see your own story with a little more compassion. If you find this conversation meaningful, I'd love it if you'd share, subscribe, or leave a review. It helps others find their way here too. Until next time, take gentle care, and remember, the journey inwards is where the real growth begins.